You see, Philip, I wait until you have clicked the little thing instead of just starting straight away.
You are so angelic.
Hello, and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by Philip Dark Lord Chase, uh, Dr. Fantasy himself, because we're going to be talking about Rings of Power, Season 2, Episode 6. And you know what? I forgot to look up the title of this episode.
Oh no, I always forget.
We're professionals.
But I will note that Sauron also is very good at appearing angelic. So,
Yeah, exactly. Just like you. You project being a good person, but deep down inside, you're the devil.
ha, ha.
And
Well,
by the way, I have a bone to pick with you.
me? More?
Making making me look like a dwarf on your last thumbnail. Hobbit boy.
That was a good thumbnail. Do you know how much do you know how much I giggle while I
I thought moving to the US, we would finally do away with my internet connection issues when you and I talk. But
yeah. But
apparent apparently the almost continual lightning and thunderstorms that we have been having here may be having some impact on the telecommunication system. So
yeah.
we will carry on regardless. We will think of it as a throwback to the bad old days when I was sitting up to the middle of the night in order to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we're going to talk about Rings of Power. So, uh, episode 6. What were your overall impressions?
I enjoyed episode 6. I thought there was some again well, we've said it a few times, but I really feel like we should point it out every time. And cinematography, fantastic. Music, beautiful. There were some really, I think, great performances by the actors as well. So all these aspects of the show, I want to be sure to highlight them because they are really strong points in this production. I think consistently strong points in this production, and it is worth pointing out. And I thought the storytelling was really, I think, following episode 5, it was more really solid storytelling, focusing on, I think, what I have at least concluded to be the strongest of the threads within the series as a whole, those being the Numenorian thread and the things going on between the dwarves and Khazad-dûm, and also I think the stuff going on lately. I've been really admiring the thread with Annatar and Celebrimbor. That's been really solid, and there were appearances of the other threads in there as needed, but they were just sort of, don't forget there's this going on over here, and this going on over here, but really we're following those main threads at the moment. So
And again, I think the the storylines in Eregion this season in particular have been fascinating. The
yeah,
stuff going on in Khazad-dûm, I agree with you, is great, but that was something I loved from season one.
yeah,
Um, and the stuff in Numenor, I think, is actually in season one felt a wee bit discontiguous, but this season has become quite central. And again, I think it points to something we've discussed before, which is there's they're spinning a number of different plates. And
right,
I think my greatest dissatisfaction with the show, and again, this is not saying, oh, this is bad, blah, blah, blah. But my greatest dissatisfaction is in trying to do so much that they aren't giving what they have the depth and time to develop.
yeah. That's a problem I have with TV in general, to be fair.
And we mentioned this before. I'm not going to belabor the point, but again, I think it kind of shows up again in this episode because if you think of the Arondir fight sequence,
Right.
you go, "Oh, great action sequence with one guy on his own fighting some orcs. Awesome. What has this
Yeah.
got to do with anything?"
Well, he did find the little map. At least there's
Okay,
some.
okay. You know the way every once in a while I have something I point out that I go, "I really wish they didn't do
Yes.
that." This again is one of those things, and this happens in TV, it happens in film. Like this is not unique to Rings of Power, but it's, oh, I've killed a guy. I'm just going to search them. And they reach down, and the very first thing they find is the thing they need to look for. And you're like,
Yeah. I
just
had the feeling, I thought that maybe they were sitting around the writing room like, what are we gonna do with Arondir? It's been a whole episode. He hasn't done anything. How can we include him in this episode? And that's kind of what we got. Cool fight sequence, but yeah, that's wasn't necessarily the neatest. But maybe that, and yeah, you're right. I mean, the first thing he finds is that. I mean, okay.
it's I'm gonna reach down to this orc, and oh look, there's something poking out from a gauntlet. It's a map. I'm gonna go and follow this map. You're like, at least have them check, like, be seen checking one corpse, walking over to that one and patting it down for something, and then find, to show. And again, it's this, because they are so pressed for time. Because, Amazon said 8 episodes, this is how long you have, and they're trying to do everything. It's not complete compression, and it's cut out anything that isn't absolutely essential to the story we're telling.
Right.
And therefore, we need to do this. And sometimes I think they're shaving off little bits of scenes that would really give not only context, but sell the scene to the viewer more.
Exactly.
And we saw this in season 1 with Elrond arriving at Khazad-dûm. And when he, so Elrond and Celebrimbor are in Celebrimbor's workshop. And then the next scene, they're walking up to the doors of Khazad-dûm.
Like they're neighbors.
And at the time, I'd said, if they had shown a shot of them getting off horses or tying up horses to go and do the thing.
Or at least running and then taking off his cloak,
Well, but that would have implied the travel distance, whereas a number of complaints at the time, which I thought were overblown, which is, oh, they just teleported. And I'm like, no, it was one of those things. If they had shown tying up the horses, that would have implied the travel. And then no one could have said, oh, well, they just teleported. You're like, no. Yeah. So you would change costuming slightly and show how they traveled without necessarily showing the travel.
Yeah.
But by just jumping from that scene directly and showing that sort of hard cut, there wasn't the implication of travel. And people, oh, well, they just magically appeared there. And no, they still had to travel there. But that's one of the issues that people have. They sort of project the computer game term of fast travel onto things because we're not shown the transition. But film and TV don't show us the transitions anymore.
Right. And that's a complaint across the board. But let me give a couple examples of things that I did love in this episode, just to emphasize that I did overall think this was a fairly strong episode. So I love it when this show leans into the mythological. I think that is one of its strong points that I'm particularly enjoying this season even more than in season 1. So one scene that I would like to highlight in regard to that is when Muriel goes underwater and with the beast of the deep, and that's the gods rendering their judgment. That scene was just gorgeous, in terms of the cinematography and the just also the weight of that moment, and in terms of it being so central to the themes of this, not just this series, but what Tolkien was always exploring. And I just thought this was a really great moment to highlight, because it is all about power and faith and and the the abuse of power, the manipulation of it on the one hand with Pharazôn there and his followers, and that twist that happens, and that's a very Tolkienian thing as well, where there is a kind of it's not direct. You don't have a big guy up in the clouds saying this shall be or anything like that, but there's an almost numinous quality to this moment that I felt was very Tolkienian and was cool. And you have Elendil there, obviously having been prepared to make that sacrifice, but then having Muriel at the last moment showing up and say, no, it needs to be me, and being right about that. That was fantastic. And then another one I thought was great on the other side was Sauron's orchestration of everything, and having him at the end of the show kind of raising his arms, like he had orchestrated this whole thing, and now it's this moment when very, I felt, mythological kind of archetypal moment where you really see this is his moment. Everything that's about to happen is because he's been pulling on these strings, and he's ready, So there were some really great, just iconic moments in there that I thought were really well done.
Yeah, and I genuinely enjoyed this episode, even though we started with a quibble I have, but it's a quibble I have with a lot of TV. But the
Yeah.
Arendair sequence, I felt, again, it show him doing something, and again, I think it's because there's trying to jam so much in, but at the same time, some of the stuff that they are developing is fantastic, and I'm really, really enjoying it. But we'll talk about the Numenorian thing slightly later, I think. But
Okay.
why don't we start with Galadriel and Adar? Because again, that's almost sort of not quite the book ending, but it's the two major sequences that they have.
Yeah.
And one of the things I liked about this, Adar is a fascinating character because yes, the almost being presented as the progenitor of the Uruk, progenitor of the orcs, but from a corrupted elf. So it's this almost halfway point, both orc and elf. And in trying to talk to Galadriel, they're on opposite sides of a war. But we have this exploration of a concept that we all say all the time and we're all aware of, which is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the lie at the heart of that, uneasy bedfellows, is the best that can come of this. But Adar has his agenda for the Uruk. And we can see one of the big threads, the character arc that Galadriel is going through, her pride and arrogance at the beginning, her belief, her self-righteous belief that she was always right. And we have seen that being chipped away and changed, and Galadriel evolving. And there was a really nice way that this was signaled here. She calls them orcs, but at the end says Uruk.
That correction. Yeah.
She comes to respect the other side because they're not just Sauron's minions, which she had made this assumption about. And she now sees that while she may not approve of them, she may not like them, and let's face it, the orcs are not good people.
Right.
But they are a people. And that challenges a lot of her assumptions and preconceptions. And she sees being high-handed, being arrogant, being prideful,
or just dismissing them as just, you're evil and that's it, and I hate your guts and I have nothing to say to you. She moves from that to, orc to Uruk. Okay, we can work together here.
And it's a concession. It's trying to find elements of, and in business they talk about, you don't want to compromise, you want to negotiate. And you go, yeah, basically the same thing. You give something away to get something. We're talking about the same concept, but the more positive way to view it is negotiation, because that way you can get rid of things that you don't particularly want to get the things that you do want. Whereas compromise is you have to give away something that you might want. But essentially the same thing. And you can see that she's working through this and trying to find a way forward for everyone, because you can almost understand the thought process in her head. If the orcs are from corrupted elves,
yes,
they have a soul. As twisted as it is, there is a possibility of salvation.
This is the only font in the room here. That if you're accepting Tolkien's narrative that orcs are corrupted elves, therefore they are beings with souls, and they are this is an origin that Adar remembers, right? This is something he has been through. You could almost maybe even think that he and Galadriel have a history prior to him becoming, one assumes, abducted and twisted into what he is now, tortured into what he is now. And having been tortured, Yeah, having been probably a captured elf who was tortured and dismissed by other elves as just, okay, evil, you might have a chip on your shoulder, right? You might just have a wee little chip there. So I feel like that dynamic between him and Galadriel that we're seeing at play is cleverly done. I'm enjoying that aspect of this thread. It's this tension and this kind of initial hostility. But he's actually in the beginning the more practical of the two. I brought you here not as an enemy, but as a potential ally. And then when he gets what he wants from her, he's like, okay, thanks. Put her back in the chains.
And again, he's not a good person. He's not a
No,
hero.
no,
But at the same time, the the lure of a simplistic binary. Oh, well, they're either good or evil. You go,
right.
right. Congratulations. Welcome to the real world where things are a bit more complicated. Like
Yeah.
look at the history of World War II and
Yep.
the alliance between the West and the USSR. Was
Yeah.
that because the USSR was, oh yeah, they're a beacon of goodness and wonderfulness, or was it because there was a greater threat and there was an uneasy alliance?
And even Tolkien himself, he set this up, right? It's not that Tolkien had pure good, pure evil. The elves in the Silmarillion make a bunch of really stupid moves, and most of the time it's out of pride. So having Galadriel be proud and initially dismissive orc, that fits. That checks out. If you look at the way the elves are portrayed, it's a story. It's a tragedy essentially. And if you're going to identify the tragic flaw in that trajectory, it's pride, right?
And
So it's
we see
the
it
way they're.
very,
Go
I was
ahead.
going to say, we see it very literally with Fëanor and the Fëanorians. Like that,
Yeah.
it is writ large in that. And
And there are
see,
nods to Feanor in the Celebrimbor arc, which we will talk
oh,
about, of course.
yeah. And that's why I actually like this, because we know how Galadriel ends up. And
Yeah.
we're seeing how she gets there.
Yes. Yes.
And this is for something that these writers are exploring and laying out for us. I'm really enjoying seeing how someone so prideful can become this great wise person. The
Right.
trials that she has gone through, the hard lessons that she has had to learn. This is how she becomes the Galadriel that we know. This is how
Right.
she gains her wisdom. This is how she gains her humility. When she refuses the ring that Frodo offers and decides to remain Galadriel,
Yeah.
that that isn't just because, oh well, she was always that way. She
Right.
has to become that person. And I think this is a wonderful exploration of that. So I
Mm.
am really liking how they are developing Galadriel. So in the first season, we saw them setting out who she currently is. This season, we're seeing how that is being changed, uh, altered, so that we can see her grow into this person. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, look, character arc. That's stunning how someone did that instead of, oh, we're just going to have all the characters be exactly the
Right.
same as they
Static.
end up.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I like that. And Adar is not a good person. Adar, like, we might understand.
But he has a history too, doesn't he?
And just because we can empathize or sympathize with his past does not necessarily mean we go, oh, well, they're all good now. You're like, but we recognize sentience, we recognize sapience, we recognize that things can shape us and change us. That
Yes.
doesn't mean we endorse the behavior or we agree with the behavior, but the moral complexity that sometimes is overlooked in Tolkien. And we see it with Boromir.
Yeah. It's in Tolkien. Tolkien is not just that binary. Yes, there are good characters and there are evil characters, but the good characters are tempted. So I don't know what it picked up or not, but I do want to make another point about this thread, which is the really great symbolism that's taken on by Morgoth's crown, the
Mhm.
stabby crown, right? And that's it confirmed, first of all, in this episode, I think for the first time, that it was Morgoth's crown. And so Sauron's boss, if people who are not familiar with the, Middle Earth who are watching this and watching the show, Morgoth was really Satan before Sauron was. Sauron was a lesser being who followed Morgoth's path, if you will, his rebellion against the creator of everything, Iluvatar. So Morgoth being originally named Melkor, right? So this crown has a history. This crown is the symbol that both Adar wants to be the boss of the orcs, and they're fighting over this legacy, if you will. They're fighting over the legacy of Morgoth, essentially. Sauron and Adar, I think, it's their object, and his idea that, oh, this is the thing we need to finish off Sauron. Apparently, that's why it was effective as a tool, because there's power invested in it, and the idea that that combined with the power in the rings would be the do the trick, to get rid of Sauron. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and another thing that I find interesting is it was Morgoth's crown. It was not Sauron's. He didn't create it. Sauron doesn't create. He uses other creations and twists them to his purpose. So I actually quite like that. He took Morgoth's crown and reshaped it to fit himself, to fit his design.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I thought that was a nice touch. And also the idea, Morgoth, it's weird because Tolkien was combining a lot of different things and creating from them. Morgoth is, I think, more similar to Kronos than he is to the devil. Because Sauron or Myron is much more closer to the Miltonian Lucifer. The powerful angel who is beautiful and deceitful and prideful, that's much closer to who Sauron is. So in some respects, Sauron is closer to the conception of the Christian devil, but Morgoth is much more similar to Kronos, or the sort of almost elemental evil, which isn't quite the same. And it's, again, mythologies conflate and borrow and meld, and Tolkien, played with things. But I like the focus on Sauron here as deceiver, and Sauron as someone who twists things to his purpose, who has these grand designs, manipulating others and other things rather than creating something himself. And I think
including Celebrimbor. Yeah.
I think that's an important point about how they are representing Sauron. But why don't we talk about Celebrimbor and Annatar and Sauron? Because that to me was one of the biggest pieces of this episode. It's one of the storylines I am most invested in. And I do apologize that I keep cutting out, Philip. I know that the connection is not great. But for me, in this, we see that sequence with, is it Charles Edwards plays Celebrimbor? He is fantastic.
He's doing a beautiful job.
He is brilliantly cast as Celebrimbor, because he is conveying everything about this character, that someone whose obsession is eating away at them. And in this obsession, it's an unhealthy obsession that is being manipulated by someone else. And for those familiar with the term, Sauron is the ultimate gaslighter. Everything, and the term comes from, I think it was it originally a play, but there was definitely a film version, and it was basically manipulating the burning of gas lamps in a house to this husband who was basically trying to drive his wife insane, and say, well, I didn't do it. It's not actually happening. And lying and making them doubt their own sanity, making them doubt their own reality. And we see how he is constantly manipulating Celebrimbor, applying praise and feeding into ego and ambition. You're going to surpass Fëanor. You're going to surpass the Silmarils, which basically until this point, where, you know, the pinnacle of what elven craftsmen could create. So appealing to pride and ambition and a legacy.
Yeah.
So appealing to all that, but at the same time, applying the pressure about, but if you don't do this, the world will be destroyed. You can be the world's savior, but if you don't do it, you are going to be responsible for the destruction of the world. There's constant manipulation. And then we see it applied quite literally with the illusion of creating the false reality in order to manipulate. And this has been a fantastic exploration, I think, of Sauron deceiving Celebrimbor. How, when Tolkien says that he did it, we don't have a lot of details, but now we're seeing a vision of how Sauron could have done it. And this is a very believable storyline. And any audience can understand this level of manipulation, this level of psychological abuse, that this is striking a resonance that a general audience, as well as a Tolkienian audience, can enjoy and understand and view and go, yeah, I see what they're doing here.
Yeah. Speaking of a Tolkienian audience, I love the symbolism that we have and the ties that we get through that statue of Fëanor holding up the Silmaril. But he's holding up this representation of a Silmaril there. And that, of course, goes back to the crown of Morgoth, in which those 3 Silmarils formerly were lodged, right? So there's a connection there. And there's a thematic connection, more importantly, as well, because you have pride and ambition and Fëanor holding up that Silmaril, and that's the whole beginning of, you know, the end of everything for that blissful existence for the elves that they formerly had. And it was a kind of an act of pride to create those Silmarils, to capture the light inside those jewels and all of that. And this is also what's happening with Celebrimbor. It's a matter, as you said, of him being manipulated, but it's also his pride that is allowing him to be led by the nose by Sauron in the first place. It's his ambition. Oh, you can outdo Fëanor. He knows exactly where to, you know, push the buttons there to keep Celebrimbor, you know, strung along here. So I love that touch that they had that statue of Fëanor there as a device for Sauron to remind Celebrimbor, here's what you're doing, buddy. You know, you got to outdo your ancestor, your famous ancestor, who was the greatest smith of all, except for maybe you. If you can do this feat, right? The rings are going to be even better than the Silmarils, right? But it also just a great symbol of pride and ambition and the consequences of going too far with those things. So I really appreciated the thought that was put into the presentation in this thread. And as we said, the acting by both actors, really, I think, the one playing Celebrimbor and Sauron, was just beautiful. Just great stuff, I felt, in this thread.
But do you know what my favorite moment was of the particular deceit and the particular manipulation? It wasn't the grand illusion. It was actually in the earlier scene where Celebrimbor, you know, we've seen it. He's so deep into trying to understand this problem, like he's so focused that he forgets Mordania's name, and we know that, you know, elves have fantastic memories, like they are more perfect than humans. But he's become almost absent-minded because so much of his focus is elsewhere. It's on this problem. He's not paying attention to what's around him. But we have this moment where he looks down, he goes, and I could have sworn my hammer was here.
Yes.
And Sauron go, oh, that hammer. And they don't draw attention to it, but it's clear Sauron is messing with him.
Big time.
He is using small illusions to make Celebrimbor doubt his own reality. It was that more than even the big illusion, which I thought was very well done. But that one small moment leads to and foreshadows the big moment that, yes, this is what Sauron has been doing the entire time, making him doubt his sanity, manipulate him. And that was the one little tiny moment of that interaction that I thought was incredibly well done and foreshadowed exactly what Sauron was going to do later.
Yeah, that was well done. Yeah.
But my second favorite interaction with them is in that scene that leads into the Grand Illusion. And that's where Celebrimbor loses it and shoves Sauron.
Yeah.
Because for Celebrimbor to lose his temper, that shows how far down this rabbit hole he has gone, how far from himself he has gone. We saw the beginnings of it when he was short and curt with his smiths in the previous episode.
Right.
But now it has gotten to a stage where he physically shoves Sauron, a person he believes to be an angelic being, someone who is from the divine realm, and he physically shoves him. And then when Annatar grabs him, he's let go of him. Like, this shows how far he has fallen.
Right. You can also see Sauron in internally. Yeah, when I'm done with you,
Oh,
yeah. When you're no longer useful to me, I have some plans for you. Yeah.
the hammer that they showed, I don't know if I've ever seen fan art of it, but there was a computer game, and I think it was Shadows of Mordor, that actually featured the hammer that Celebrimbor used in the making of the rings, and I think it's a very similar design.
Yeah, I missed that last bit, but yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was saying that there was a computer game, and I think it was Shadows of Mordor, that Celebrimbor's hammer had a very, very similar design to the one that they used in Rings of Power. Because again, it has that, it's very functional, it's a hammer.
But it's also very elvish, yeah.
This creation of something of form and function being beautifully melded together.
Yeah.
No, there was an odd thing that happened actually with their interaction where Sauron presents a beautiful little container full of mithril dust. And I was thinking about this because obviously we have that scene. We'll talk about the Khazad-dûm stuff in a second. But in that sequence, he doesn't get mithril. And I'm thinking, I don't think that's actually mithril dust.
I was wondering about that. Yeah.
Because the container itself is not something the dwarves would have given him.
He said, I got it from Narvi. Well, we didn't see that. Yeah.
But the container is quite an elvish container. It's not a dwarven container. I think that's more of the illusion. And I think the reason he's getting away with it is because he knows that Celebrimbor is still lost in trying to design the rings.
Right.
Because that's what we see him fixated on, these different designs and trying to understand, again, form and function to create the effect. That this is this balance point between the idea of magic and the idea of a magic system. Modern audiences love magic systems. There must be a realist material reason for why this thing happens this way. And we're leaning into that with this idea of design. But at the same time, it is more mystical. It is part of the magic of Tolkien, which wasn't a system.
Yeah. In that light, I felt one of the weaker moments in this thread was when they had Celebrimbor drawing different designs for rings, and then, no, I don't like this one, X, and I thought, we don't really need that. Please don't do that. Because it just seemed like they were trying to make it seem more like a science in a sense, which I didn't really think that was necessary, but okay.
Yeah. But for me, I actually like that because it's not about, it must have this, and it's about the ingredients, the design, and everything flowing together. It has to be this perfect amalgamation of craft and skill and intent
and spirit,
and everything combined. And that is part of the design of the ring. Otherwise, why would the elven rings all be different? If this is how you make a magic ring, to stamp there, we just make all the magic rings, they all look the same. It's
Right.
not about that. It's about his understanding of the flow of energy in the world, and
Mm,
the idea that it's not a schematic. These are artist renderings. And again,
right.
it's about the art, not the science. And what he is doing is this balance between the two. And I think for a show in the modern day that is trying to do this, I actually think this is a fairly effective way to balance an audience expectation that magic has discernible mechanical rules,
Uh-huh.
and what is the truth of that Tolkien was exploring, that magic is doesn't work that way. That's not what magic is. Magic is something grander, ineffable, liminal, uh, awe-inspiring, both awe in terms of something to be feared, but also something that creates wonder. That
Mm,
magic transcends the material.
right.
That's the point. Um, right. Can we talk about the Bombadil pseudo Gandalf pseudo Blue Wizard thing so I can get my gripe off my chest?
I mean, I was not on board with the introduction of Bombadil in the first place. So I didn't got it. But I was saying that I, in the first place, was not completely on board with the Bombadil appearance to begin with. So I have no new complaints about what happens with him in this episode, except that, he's obviously serving this mentor function, this mysterious, wise mentor who can't speak in just understandable language. It has to be in this kind of like mystical, you'll know when you know kind of thing. So so we have the Gandalf figure essentially being led to a point where he has to make this decision, right? Okay, you're either going to help your friend or you're going to find your staff and save the world, and you can't do both. Sorry. So necessarily the best part of this episode, but it wasn't worse than the what happened previously with this thread. So yeah, I was okay
Um,
with it.
one of the things I like here, well, first of all, let me say, we are getting the Blue Wizard storyline, so I am happy about that, even if it is
Okay.
Gandalf and not the actual Blue Wizard. I am fine. Okay, moving on. I'm happy that we're getting the Blue Wizard storyline in Rune. I'm happy. The fact that it's more and more Gandalf is why, but okay. Um, the one element of this that I really like, a really strong theme that is being explored, is that the side of evil in this story is all about mastery. It's all about imposing your will to get others to do your bidding,
Yeah.
regardless of what they want. We have seen this with all of the bad guys.
Right.
And we see that is the easy way to do something. If you can command, you order it done. But what we see with Bombadil, when he speaks to, what was it, Old Man Ironwood,
Yeah.
it's not about ordering Old Man Ironwood to do the thing, just as it wasn't about ordering Old Man Willow to do the thing. It
Right.
was about coming to an agreement, coming to an arrangement. It was about
Yeah.
balancing of interests. It was about cooperating with the world,
Yeah.
balance. And when we see the stranger figure saying, well, how do I master this?
Mm,
That's why he keeps feeling these lessons,
right.
because he thinks, I want to do this thing. How do I make the world conform to my will? Which is Sauron's approach. And what Bombadil seems to be trying to show him, and that he keeps failing to see, is it's not about bending the world to your will. It is
Right.
about finding the best way forward.
And interestingly, the terminology, which I think it's cool they picked up and used it. He is the servant of the secret fire, not the master, but the servant of the secret fire. Meaning, as someone who practices magic, he has discerned that his role is to serve, right? So that's a key, little that fits with this whole theme very nicely.
And that is why I think this is so important. And it's why I have given up trying to, say it's not Gandalf. Because,
Oh, I think it's Gandalf at this point. Yeah.
yeah, but it's the Blue Wizard storyline.
Yeah.
Um,
I notice you're wearing blue today as well.
I almost always wear blue. But
Because
with
you're a blue wizard.
but with this, again, emphasizing service, emphasizing working with people, emphasizing trying to make the world better, not because you will it, but
Right.
you're doing the best for the world. This is such a key aspect that I think often gets overlooked because we look to Gandalf, he's this wise mentor figure. He leads, he makes a decision. But even in The Lord of the Rings, we see he's not infallible.
Right.
We see that his memory is not perfect. We see that the shell that his angelic being is inhabiting limits his power. And again, he works with mortals, he works with people to achieve the thing. It's not about, I am dictating to you.
Right.
So where did he learn this? And again, this idea of a character arc, that this is how he becomes that figure. Now, because he's an angelic being, they could have started off that way. Do angelic beings really change? I don't know. But I think that's an interesting thing to follow. The reason I have a quibble about this is you either save your friend or save the world. And you're like,
that's what I was saying
really?
as well. Yeah.
It's a false dichotomy. And then it's, and go and find your staff. And it's this giant field of dead trees.
Right.
Well, if they're all dead trees, this is not about finding balance. This is not about working with the things. It's, I want that branch. You can't talk to the dead tree. And then Bombadil disappears. And you're like, really? We're doing the mysterious Yoda figure.
Yeah.
Now, him speaking in ancient wisdom, nonsensical terms, and always speaking in cryptic phrases, that's an old trope. I don't particularly like it, but also I don't criticize them for doing it because that's the expectation for, when you ask the wise figure, what should I do about this? And they never give you a straight answer. You go, yeah, congratulations. Like that's how this works.
You have to arrive at the answer yourself. Yeah.
It's not about the answer. It's about how we understand how to get to the answer. Because if you do that, we frequently realize the question we were asking was the wrong question. And it's about having the insight. The insight is what we're aiming towards, not the answer to the question. Right, I get that. That's what wise mentor figures do. Fine, moving on. But yeah, I'm still not overly enthralled with Bombadil being this mentor to the Astari.
I just don't feel like that's a role that works for me. For his character, as I experience his character, I'm still not quite on board with that. But okay.
I think it's interesting. It's not what I imagined. But if you're going to include Bombadil, this gives Bombadil something to do. I just wish that Bombadil had been closer to how I'd conceived of him and located where I had conceived of him being and interacted with people that way.
I just don't think you needed Bombadil in this at all. But
as much as I love the Blue Wizard storyline, I don't think you needed the Rune storyline at all.
Yeah.
But that's personal preference time. We judge what they are doing, not they failed to do the thing that I wanted them to do. Because no one can please everyone, and no one can create something that is going to be everything that we wanted from the thing all individually.
And the jury's still out. They may find a way, they may have a way already planned to make this storyline much more relevant to the rest of the show.
I will withhold judgment. And if they tie it all together, I'm going to be the first person to say, you know what, I was harsh about this being an unnecessary storyline, and it turned out to be brilliant, and I really like it. I still think if it ends up being really important, there will have been other ways that they could have done it
Uh-huh.
that would have made more sense structurally. But
But you're getting Blue Wizard storyline, so
yeah, I'm happy. So why don't we talk about is it can we talk okay.
we have to
Poppy?
mention Nori and Poppy.
Yeah, the whole Nori thing, like who cares? The thing with Poppy and nobody milking a snake
And giving a kiss.
while she's holding the snake and
Yeah.
leans in, and you're like, the snake is going to bite one of you.
Nobody's gonna get bitten.
They're both going to get bitten. That bug, I kept waiting for them to lean in for the kiss and then the kiss to be interrupted because the snake was going to hiss. Oh, and bring. No, that is a class. Like, very rarely do I refer to Chekhov's gun because I think it is overdone as a reference where people say you must do these things. That was one where I went, this is not subverting audience expectation. This is forgetting she had a venomous snake in her hands.
Yeah, that was that was an interesting choice.
You're like, but
more interesting for me though was actually Nori's bit while she was talking to, and forgive me, I forgot the name of the leader of the stores there, but when they were talking to each other, and there was a really heartfelt moment when she was talking to her about home, and this is where I buried my husband, and this is where the tree there, I've nursed it from the time I was a kid, and this is what, of course, the Harfoots have been all about, is the lack of a home, seeking a home. So that theme has continued into this thread, I thought, nicely. But that interaction was well done, I thought, between Nori and the leader of the stores there, and her wrestling with how do I now deal with a situation where I feel like I'm bringing something bad on these people who are helping me, so I like Nori's character. I wish it were more relevant to the rest of the show, and I've loved the interactions between her and the stranger and what they brought out in each other. I really appreciate, but I will also concede that it hasn't been the most relevant thus far. So.
But you're right. That conversation is very important because it's the distinction between home as a place and home is what you create somewhere with the people, with the memories, with all of these things. Home is not house. Home is something different. And for Poppy and the Harfoot, home is being with the people.
Yeah.
And we can see for the Sturs, but this is our home. This is where our community is.
Right.
And it's the blending of those two things is what really creates home. And it's, we will see with the creation, the foundation of the Shire.
Yeah.
The bringing together of all of these different things. And I think, eventually we will see what hobbits haven't we seen yet? There was the Sturs,
the Fallowhides.
The Fallowhides. Were they the ones in the boats?
Yeah, they're the most elvish of the three, you could say. They're the tallest ones, slightly thinner build, slightly lighter complexion, I think is what Tolkien describes.
Because
but yeah.
I remember it was a Tolkien bestiary, yellow cover with a dragon on the front cover. And I remember the sketch of the Hobbit in a boat
okay.
I can remember that, and I got that when I was about 10, 11 years old.
Okay. I actually think it might be the stores who are, according to Tolkien, more comfortable in boats. But
we know there's another tribe of hobbits that we're going to see, and then eventually they all come together to create the Shire. But like I think that comment about home, because we see the destruction of Eregion through the severing of the relationships of Celebrimbor and his smiths. Yeah. He is not paying attention to his duties as ruler.
Yeah.
That is the destruction of Eregion that Sauron has orchestrated. And then we see it compared to the physical threatening and destruction of Eregion with the arrival of Adar and the orcs, which Sauron has also orchestrated. That theme of what home is really important. It's not just the physical place, it's the bonds. And Sauron is destroying both the bonds and the physicality.
Yeah.
So I thought that was that was a nice thematic connection between the two.
Yeah, there you go. There's something there.
So do you want to talk about Khazad-dûm and then we'll talk about Numenor? Or do you want to do it the other way around?
I think Khazad-dûm makes a little more sense because it's more directly related to stuff that we already talked about, at least because you did have the Sauron visiting Khazad-dûm to ask for more mithril and getting rejected by greedy Papa Durin, who is now thinking in terms of, and at first Durin Jr. is like, oh my God, he's not as bad as I thought. But then we realized the reason he rejected him was because he wants to milk them for more and make them more desperate, you know? So he's like, oh no, what's happened to you, Dad? You know? So yeah, he's going further and further along the ring, of course, is got a firm grip on, and Durin puts it perfectly. Is it, you know, is it your ring or does it have you? You know, and the way he posed that was perfect.
And of course, Annatar dropping the line precious.
Yes,
You want something more precious.
That was a little more subtle, and I appreciated that actually, because some of the times, some of the callbacks have been a little too blunt for me. But that was a really good one. A little on the nose. But that one was a good one. I liked that one. Yeah.
Yeah, because what was it? Yeah, Bombadil basically repeats or uses a variant on a line that Gandalf uses.
Yes.
Later on in the Lord of the Rings. And you go, well, okay, so that's where Gandalf heard it. And that's where he learned the lesson to repeat to someone else. Again, it's nice having the points of connection. It's nice having things that will make people think of that scene and rethink that scene. Or, you know, does Gandalf just know these things? Is it just, or was it something that he has learned over time? If he learned it, how did he learn it?
Right.
I don't necessarily roll my eyes when I hear some of them, but I do like it when things are a little more subtle and woven in. Yeah. One of the things that I liked about the scene with Durin just before we meet Annatar, that sequence, is the wheelbarrow full of gold and the gold coins spilling from it and no one rushing to pick them up. This is now gold breeding gold, something that Tolkien readers will be very familiar with.
Yep.
But there is so much gold now that it is just more and more. And what is its purpose? Because the purpose before had been to enhance Khazad-dûm. And now it seems its purpose is to simply hoard.
To provide a future bed for Smaug. Or no, actually that's the wrong mountain, but
wrong mountain.
Yeah. But yeah.
We see piles of gold being formed. Now, this is not necessarily about, I don't think this is about Durin Sr. wanting to enrich himself. He is never going to spend this. This is not about, this is just about hoarding it and having more. This is an element of greed.
He's a Middle-earth billionaire, basically, at this point. And why does he need more and more and more? Well, just because, you know, he needs more. It becomes its own goal, right?
And with all of this gold, why is he still taxing his people?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not about that, and it's just about amassing wealth. It's not about having spending it or what you can do with it. So we suddenly see the intentionality becomes really, really important for this.
Yeah.
And in that sequence with Annatar, with Sauron, Durin Jr., we shouldn't do this. You can see that's where he's from. His father, we shouldn't do this. And it's, finally. But the intentionality behind it is radically different. Intentions matter. It's not just about the result. Yeah. It's about the intention. It's about how we get there, because that tells us so much. Yeah. And that's what I was saying earlier about the wisdom. It's not about getting to the right answer. It's about the insight in how we get to that answer is the true wisdom.
And of course, there's Sauron's response when he looks to the fire and you see the foreshadowing of the Balrog, right?
Yeah, on the one hand, very, very cool to get that little visual reference. Yeah. On the other hand, I'm like, seriously, you're putting holograms in Middle-earth?
Yeah.
I am so, oh, look, I have a little tiny Balrog in my hand. Oh, no.
Well, I kind of liked it again as a more mythical moment and a kind of a
yeah. Oh no, I was being slightly flippant and facetious with that.
You being flippant? Oh my goodness. Well,
It's almost like I've changed personality. But yeah, I love that when there is this refusal that Sauron knows the Balrog is there. Durin is blind to it because it is not of the mountain.
yeah.
And Sauron's like, okay, I know what's down there. And it's clear Durin is disregarding Diza's warning because Diza knows there's something down there.
Oh yeah, she knows. The one part of this thread that okay, I was fine with, but it didn't work as well for me was I like the idea, first of all, that Disa and Durin have decided to resist Durin's seniors, the king's descent into madness and to actively resist it. But the way they're going about it through just kind of like brute force, where she sings the bats down and pushes back the miners. I mean, that was kind of, to me, not the most effective way to go about this, and a very temporary, as if the two of them are going to stave off, all of the, Durin's forces. Could there be a more clever way of achieving this goal of trying to at least to put a pause to Durin's delving deeper and deeper out of this, consuming greed? I think there could have been a more effective,
Yeah.
presentation
Well,
of that. But it's dramatic. I'll give
yeah,
him that. It's dramatic.
there were 2 points about it that I wanted to bring up. One is the idea of using sound to summon the bats. This
Yeah.
was actually in the original screenplay for Tim Burton's Batman.
Oh, really? Wow.
And obviously it got cut. But if you read the novelization, it's still there. And it was something that I think in one of the Nolan films, they then, or it might have been in one of the, maybe it was one of the Schumacher films, where he activates the thing and it creates the swirling of the bats. Actually, I'm fairly sure it was one of the Nolan films, but he uses a sonar to attract the bats in order to get away. That was in Tim Burton's Batman in the original screenplay, which I thought was, it's very cool. It's an idea that's been around. But the aspect of it I liked, we have Diza using this sound, this song, and we know how important song is to the magic of Tolkien's world. We understand the importance of song to Tolkien's world. That is the fabric of reality. And Diza uses her song. And the other dwarves are like, oh, was that meant to frighten us? Because it's song. And they're like, what's the big deal? And they got a bit of a blast from it. They're like, yeah, whatever. But it works in conjunction with the bats, with the natural world, to create the effect. So what I was saying earlier about this balance that Bombadil was trying to teach pseudo Gandalf, that's
No,
what
it's
we
just
see.
Gandalf now. Yeah.
That's what we see Diza doing. So I liked that aspect of it. But I completely agree that Diza and Durin, as much as I love the two of them together, they're very human. I love that moment where Durin breaks and is crying because he can't even see his father in those eyes anymore.
Yeah, there's some good moments there. Yeah.
That this is breaking them. And again, this breaking of what home is because of the relationships. Home is the relationship. And just because the person is physically there doesn't mean that they are the same person. So I agree that Durin and Diza facing down, well, Diza on her own facing them down, then Durin coming out with his axe. Like, what were you going to do? Hit another dwarf with that weapon? I would have preferred
Right.
Durin Jr. now as the prince again, going out and making the political speech.
Yeah.
Warning people. But again, preference, we have to see where it goes. But the Khazad-dûm stuff, I am still deeply intrigued by, because it is one of the most human stories of what happens when a leader goes bad. It can no longer be reasoned with, can no longer be argued with. Like that moment where Durin says, just take off the ring. If it doesn't control you, just take it off.
Take it off. Yeah.
And it's almost like, I'll stand, like no one's going to take it from you. Like I'll stand way back here. Just prove to me that you can take off the ring. Because that's, if you remember all of those things about addicts, oh, I can stop anytime, I'm in control. Well, okay, then stop for a day. Oh no, but I don't need to prove to you that I can. I just know that I can. Because they can't. He's addicted to the ring. He's addicted to the power. He's addicted to gathering more and more. It is a sickness. And I thought that was actually really well realized, that we can understand this now. We can understand the lure of this power, the lure of these rings. All of this is being put in terms and represented in a way that can make sense to us in terms of understanding that addiction.
Yeah, that's well said. I got most of that. So yeah, I completely agree. This is a very, again, Tolkienian theme, and the link between power and addiction is something that you see all over the place. And this particular thread, I think, is doing a brilliant job of it. Power, pride, ambition, addiction, the consequences on the people that you're supposed to be leading and helping, but instead you're putting them in peril through that ambition, and they are digging too deep. So yeah.
So let's finish off by talking about Numenor. And I'm going to suggest two different things that really struck out to me. And we can talk about some of the other stuff. But the first is the Miller Crucible moment of Elendil. Basically, yeah, I'll do it, but you cannot have my name.
Yeah.
That I know that's not the line that he uses, but for me, this was what we saw in the Crucible. It's the same thing, that you can bend someone so far, but eventually it's not pride anymore. It's integrity.
Right.
And for many, they confuse integrity for pride. And it's not, because ultimately there is only so much real politic that you can do before you have undermined the very essence of who you are. And
Yeah.
that's not pride anymore. It's about understanding integrity. So that was one of the key aspects that I think would be fun to talk about. And the other was what you had mentioned earlier about Miriel in white being
Yeah.
offered as a sacrifice to the fish dragon. Oh,
Yeah.
a virgin sacrifice in white and purity being offered to the dragon as a test of whether they are good or bad. You know,
Mm.
the mythological resonance of that was so incredibly powerful. It
Yeah.
evokes so many of our myths. The virgin sacrifice, the feeding of someone to a monster. Like, it was recreated in King Kong. Like
Yeah.
that was evoking exactly the same mythological line, mythological reasoning. So that was one of those moments that when I looked at it, the offering her up to the pool, I loved. I absolutely love. This is this wonderful mythological. It strikes so many resonances, and it works for all of the different thematic stuff and the politicking that's going on. It fitted with everything, and I thought cinematically, seeing her in that moment in the water and
Mm.
her being blind, she cannot see the
Yes, big
monster
part
in
of
front
it.
of her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet she is there fearlessly walking into this water, walking into the
Yeah.
future to face this challenge because of her faith, because of her responsibility, her need to take responsibility for her actions and her decisions. She is the antithesis of selfish. She is the antithesis of what we are seeing in that materialist realpolitik of Pharazôn. It is the belief, the true belief in something greater and trusting in the design for the world, but taking responsibility for the decisions
Yeah.
that you've made in it.
It's
She
a
is walking that line. And
yeah. It's a moment of pure faith, and it's the fact that she is blind, I think, is a very interesting facet of this, because here you have this vast creature that is essentially acting in a divine role. It is rendering divine judgment. It is the vessel through which divine judgment is being rendered. And it sees into her eyes, and these blind eyes that are a mirror to her soul. And that is when it releases her. It was after that exchange between them. There was an understanding that leapt out there. So I love that. I thought that was very Tolkienian in the sense of this being a moment of faith, a moment of where the numinous decides the outcome. in a way that is pivotal. And it's interesting to see how a person who as cynical as Ar-Pharazôn is defeated by this, because
So start your Pharazôn point again, please.
Okay. Yeah. So just the thing one of the things I found interesting as well about the scene was that there's this moment of faith and wonder and the numinous that defeats the cynical figure of Ar-Pharazôn, who's basically he's a manipulator. He's a planner. He's a plotter. He has no actual faith in anything except for Ar-Pharazôn, right? But he was soundly defeated in this moment by Muriel's and her faith. So that was an aspect of the scene that I thought presented.
Yeah, well, I was going to point out, stop referring to him as our Pharazôn. He might be your Pharazôn, but he's not my Pharazôn.
Yeah, he's only called Pharazôn in the show, right?
No, he is. His official title is our Pharazôn.
It is R. Okay, he's taking on the R.
Well, he assumed the kingship, and he's not Palantir. So he's changed the prefix to
right. So from Tar to R, meaning they've gone from the Elvish to the Numenorian speech, which is like, screw you, elves, screw you. We're doing our own thing. We're the greatest nation in Middle Earth, right? Yeah.
And
so.
Basically they've spilled the tea.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. But I thought that this was really fascinating because I love courtroom scenes. A lot of the time, because I like that of the standing up, and you can see that Elendil is willing to bend because he feels responsible for what happened. So he is willing to say that this shouldn't have happened. That's within who he is as a person.
I lost my temper. Yeah.
And what followed, he feels, was his fault. Now, we all know Kemen's to blame, this sniveling little shit. Yeah. But Elendil could have diffused that situation. He didn't. So he feels responsible. He admits his guilt for that.
Right.
But when they ask him to do something, to recognize Ar-Pharazôn, when he knows the eagle showed up for Muriel, Muriel is the ruler. Pharazôn is a usurper. And Pharazôn does not stand for, nor should stand for, Numenor. And I think, I've lost Philip again. Oh, are you back?
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, did you hear any of that?
I did. Muriel, the eagle, but you might want to repeat it just in case.
Okay, so the eagle showed up for Muriel. Yeah. Showed up to recognize Muriel's claim to the throne as the true ruler. Pharazôn is a usurper. He twisted the meaning of it. He is not and should not be recognized as ruler or as king. That Elendil cannot lie in that way. That is a betrayal, not only of his faith in the Valar and their messenger, not only in his belief that Muriel is the true ruler, but it would be dishonest and lying to do that. And he cannot break.
Okay. We're back.
Apparently my internet connection is going, nope.
It's being a little uncooperative.
Okay.
But
so one more time I will try and run through this.
Pharazôn.
When Elendil is asked that question, he can renounce his crimes because he feels responsible. I may try and edit in my explanation from earlier. Yeah. But when asked to recognize Ar-Pharazôn, he cannot, because it is a lie.
Right.
Pharazôn was not recognized by the Valar. Pharazôn was not the heir. Pharazôn is not good for Numenor. Pharazôn is betraying all of Numenor's beliefs. And for Elendil to say that he is going to obey Pharazôn and going to respect him as the true ruler, he would have to betray his faith in the Valar, his belief in Muriel, his understanding of the law, and every aspect of what he feels makes Numenor Numenor. That he cannot do because it would be a betrayal of so many different aspects of his being, and therefore his integrity It is not about pride. It is about his integrity and honor as an officer who has served Numenor, as someone who believes in Numenor. He has the integrity to stand up for his beliefs when they are backed up by all these pieces of evidence. And that is so neatly contrasted with what happens with Arian, because she comes in and she accuses him of pride. Because if she acknowledges that Elendil has integrity, that he is actually right, she has to acknowledge that she is wrong, that she did something wrong, that she is responsible for something wrong, and she cannot admit her own culpability. It is easier to blame someone else than to admit your own responsibility. And yet what we saw in the courtroom, in that court sequence, Elendil admits responsibility. Miriel, just before she walks into the order, she claims responsibility. These are people who are willing to admit their mistakes, who are willing to accept the consequences of their actions. But Arian and Pharazôn, no. They do not accept the consequences of their own actions. Kemen does not accept the consequences of his own actions. They shirk their responsibilities. They have no integrity. They have no honor. And that exploration of that, I thought, was incredibly well done. Because when Arian goes to see Elendil to beg him to do this, she had already arranged for Miriel to come with her because she knew her father would not do this. She already knew that.
Yeah.
And it's not pride, but she accuses him of being prideful because that assuages her guilt and absolves her of her responsibility if it's his flaw and fault.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because what we see here between Eärien and Elendil is how grief, people respond different ways to grief, and they are grieving the loss of, they think, that he's gone, of Isildur, whom we didn't see actually at all in this episode. So I'm assuming next episode, we'll see him in the next one, I'm pretty sure. But this is a response to grief that you do sometimes see. Sometimes people come together and bond and commiserate and help each other. Other times you see families going through a terrible grief. It can create a rift, and this is what we're seeing here in this case between Eärien and Elendil, where there probably was a disagreement to begin with, but the loss and the grief have created that crack and made a huge chasm out of it. And her response to it is to go with probably her inclination toward the more mechanical side of it. She's I think it was established already that she's some kind of an engineer, right? That she's a very capable engineer.
An architect.
And architect. Okay, so she has a more maybe mechanistic view of how things can work, and doesn't have much room for ideas of faith. And her father to her seems like a bit of an idealist, and that was probably something that existed in their relationship to begin with, but that loss has exacerbated that difference and made it a source of contention between them. She's very torn in this whole situation.
Because I think
I'm just saying you can still see the love that exists between them despite all this.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because they both believe they've lost Isildur, but Elendil can turn to his faith for comfort. She has nothing to turn to except anger that something has been taken from her. Again, a lot of us have reacted this way when we have lost someone that we loved.
Right.
We have lashed out in anger. We have yelled at the galaxy, at the universe for stealing from us, because we viewed that person's life as something that we own. Something as precious been taken from us, our relationship with them. Our anger at that, our sense of betrayal at that, our sense of injustice at that demands answer. But for Elendil, while he is no less torn up by this, his faith gives him comfort. And I think that's an important point, because we see how, and I've forgotten the name of the sniveling lord who suggests the using the old tradition as a way to try Elendil. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but using the old tradition. Oh, if he's one of the faithful, let the faithful, let's use the old tradition, because they don't believe. They don't believe in the Valar. They don't believe in this religion. They don't believe that these people will be protected by these divine figures. They're like, no, let's summon a sea monster and watch a sea monster eat them, because that's going to be fun. And no one can complain, because they are absolutely convinced that if they summon the sea monster, it's going to eat Elendil. Because they have no faith. They have no belief. And yet in Tolkien's world, faith and belief is incredibly important. Not that it diminishes free will. In Tolkien's world, free will is hugely important, but faith and belief are an integral part of the world. And so when we have that sequence and Miriel offers to go, we see that Elendil had been willing to make the sacrifice himself. He was willing to test this. And if he failed, it would just be on him. But now someone he cares about, someone he wants to protect, is offering themselves. He has a moment of doubt, because what if they are wrong? Pharazôn looks at all of this, and you can see he's doing the calculation. Well, chances are the sea monster's going to eat her. I win. Yeah, no big deal. Because again, he doesn't believe this, but he wanted to get rid of who he saw as a threat. He doesn't believe that Miriel is a threat. Miriel, he can handle.
It's convenient. Yeah, it's convenient political theater, for him, and his advisor, noble guy whose name his name was Steve Bannon, maybe, I don't know.
Ooh, but Pharazôn has already beaten Miriel. He already holds power over Miriel, and she's a blind woman. And
that's what he thinks. That's what he thinks. Yeah.
And so getting rid of Miriel now is not what he wants, which I think that's why we see that moment of hesitation.
Right.
Because the threat he sees is the sea captain, the man who is respected, the man who has integrity and honor, the man who can command the respect of the people.
Yeah.
And that's just been taken away from him in this moment. And then when this ancient ceremony does not go his way, I think this is the fracture point that we're going to see with Numenor, because now we have the beginnings of civil war. Now we have the two sides, which had been mentioned before, had been built up before, but now we're going to see they are going to split the society. You are either a kingsman or one of the faithful, because now you have two rulers.
Yep, and Pharazôn is also being led on by the Palantir, which he is increasingly using. And again, power, addiction, all these themes being rolled into here very effectively, I think. So yeah, you can see Numenor is not on a good course.
So I am fascinated. I am deeply intrigued, and I am genuinely enjoying this series. I think season 2, for all of my quibbles and the things I go and grumble about, I am glad I am watching this, because there's so much interesting stuff happening, and things that are making me think about aspects of Tolkien's world and these broad concepts. This is what I love about storytelling, about good storytelling. It's not just some, oh, well, that was entertaining, and now move on with my life. It's something that sits with me and makes me consider all of these things and re-question elements of stories I already know, elements of my life, elements of my belief. That, for me, that is the power of great storytelling. And while I may quibble and have complaints about certain aspects of how they're doing things, this show is achieving that, which I think is good. And I know not everyone believes that, but fine, that's what I believe. And, you know, as we keep saying, everyone's entitled to their opinion on this. Obviously, apart from you and I, because we're either shills because we like it, or we didn't understand it, which is why we don't like something. We're both. We're Occam's critics.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
No, not. No. What's the box with the cat in it? Not Occam. Schrodinger.
Oh,
Schrodinger's
yes.
critics, because we both like it too much and we hate it too much.
Yeah. How do we do that? Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, my internet just is not having a good day today. So why don't we end it here?
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining me and putting up with my really bad internet connection today.
Oh, you're worth it, AP.
And for those of you still watching, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and we will see you in the next one.